There's a particular kind of silence that fills a courtroom when a verdict is about to be read. It's not peaceful. It's the kind that makes your chest tighten, where every breath sounds too loud and time seems to stretch impossibly thin. On October 14th, 2025, that silence hung over a Broward County courtroom like a held breath. And when it finally broke, it shattered two families in completely different ways. The jury foreman stood, paper trembling slightly in his hands, and spoke words that had taken over 3 years to reach. Guilty of first-degree murder. What followed wasn't the dramatic gasps you see in movies. It was rawer than that. Kayla Hodgson's mother collapsed into her sister's arms, their bodies shaking with sobs that had been building for years. Across the aisle, Sakiyna Thompson's face went completely blank, as if her mind had simply left her body, unable to process the reality of spending the rest of her life behind bars. But here's what makes this case different from the hundreds of true crime stories you've heard before. This wasn't about a random act of violence or a stranger in the night. This was about something far more common and, in some ways, far more terrifying. It was about jealousy that festered in the glow of phone screens, about a digital block that became an obsession, about the distance between scrolling through someone's photos and boarding a flight with disguise in your bag. If stories that explore how ordinary emotions can lead to extraordinary tragedy matter to you, subscribe. We cover cases that force us to ask uncomfortable questions about ourselves. The question everyone kept asking after the verdict was simple but haunting. How does a social media rivalry end with a 23-year-old woman dead on her apartment floor? To understand that, you have to go back to before the violence, before the jealousy, even to when these were just two women living completely separate lives that should never have intersected. Sakiyna Thompson was 31 years old, living in Queens, New York, when this story begins. People who knew her described someone with an undeniable presence. She was a friend who organized group trips, who gave advice without being asked, who had opinions on everything and wasn't shy about sharing them. She had ambitions that stretched beyond her circumstances, always talking about building something bigger, something that would prove she was more than her past. But beneath that confident exterior was someone who carried wounds from relationships that hadn't worked out the way she planned. Someone who needed to feel chosen, to feel prioritized, to feel like she mattered more than anyone else in someone's world. Those who knew her well said she had a pattern of holding on too tight, of seeing endings as rejections rather than natural conclusions. Then there was Kayla Hodgson, 7 years younger, living her life in South Florida with a lightness that seemed to come naturally. At 23, she was still figuring things out in the way most people in their early 20s are. She worked hard, helped her family, had dreams about starting her own business someday, maybe something with makeup or fashion. Her Instagram was full of the kinds of things you'd expect. Selfies with friends, sunset photos, mirror pictures with captions about gratitude and growth. Nothing remarkable, nothing that should have made her a target. She was just living, posting, existing in the casual way we all do online now. The man at the center of this triangle isn't the focus of this story, and honestly, his name doesn't matter as much as his role. What matters is that he and Sakiyna had history. The messy kind. The kind where you break up but keep texting. Where you say it's over but still check each other's posts. Where you tell your friends you've moved on but secretly hope they haven't. When that relationship finally ended for real, it wasn't clean. There were lingering digital threads, late-night messages that shouldn't have been sent, posts that seemed designed to provoke a reaction. And then came Kayla, stepping into a space that Sakiyna hadn't fully left yet. Here's where the story takes a turn that might feel familiar if you've ever felt that spike of irrational emotion seeing an ex with someone new online. That moment when your logical brain knows you should just scroll past, but something primal makes you click, makes you zoom in, makes you memorize details you'll torture yourself with later. Kayla and her new boyfriend went public with their relationship the way people do now. Through photos, at the beach, at dinner, in his car with matching smiles. To the rest of the world, it was just another couple sharing their happiness. But to Sakiyna, scrolling through those images from hundreds of miles away, each photo was a knife. Because here's the truth about jealousy that we don't talk about enough. It's not really about the other person. It's about what that person represents. Every photo of Kayla was evidence that Sakiyna had been replaced, that she hadn't been enough, that someone younger, someone different, someone else was now getting the attention, the affection, the priority that she desperately wanted. Friends later told investigators that Sakiyna became fixated. She'd screenshot posts, analyze them with friends, craft narratives about what they meant. She'd spend hours wondering what Kayla had that she didn't, what made this new woman worth choosing. The obsession grew quietly, the way these things do, fed by algorithms that kept suggesting posts, by sleepless nights, by a wound that wouldn't close. And then came the moment that prosecutors would later point to as a turning point. Kayla blocked her. One tap, one digital boundary. And suddenly, Sakiyna couldn't see anything anymore. The window into that life, into that relationship, slammed shut. For most people, a block is uncomfortable but final. It's a clear message to move on. But for someone already spiraling, someone who built their emotional world around monitoring a situation they couldn't control, that block became unbearable. It wasn't just rejection anymore. It was erasure. Friends at Sakiyna talked about it constantly. What were they posting now? What was being said about her? Were they laughing at her? The not knowing became worse than the knowing. That blocked account took on a power it never should have had, transforming from a social media function into a symbol of everything Sakiyna felt she'd lost. Meanwhile, Kayla had no idea she'd become the center of someone else's spiral. She was just living her life, going to work, spending time with family, planning a future. There's no evidence she wanted to hurt anyone, or even thought much about her boyfriend's ex. She blocked an account that was causing drama and moved on. It should have ended there. But by early 2022, something had shifted in Sakiyna's mind. The obsession had reached a critical mass where thinking about it wasn't enough anymore. She needed to do something, to confront the situation, to make Kayla understand. Understand what exactly? That's the question that makes this case so chilling. What did she think would happen when she showed up at that door? What conversation did she imagine having? What resolution did she think was possible? These are questions that only one person can answer, and her answers would change depending on when you asked. On July 13th, 2022, Sakiyna woke up in Queens and made a series of decisions that would destroy 2 lives before the day was over. She booked a flight from LaGuardia to Fort Lauderdale. It wasn't a last-minute impulse. The ticket had been purchased days earlier, which means she'd been planning this, thinking about it, preparing for it. Security footage from the airport shows her moving to the terminal that morning looking unremarkable. Just another traveler in comfortable clothes, a bag over her shoulder, expression neutral. If you didn't know what came next, you'd scroll right past that footage without a second thought. But what was in that bag tells a different story. After landing in Florida that afternoon, Sakiyna rented a car and checked into a hotel. She didn't go straight to Kayla's apartment. Instead, she made stops. She purchased items that prosecutors would later present to a jury. A wig, dark clothing, gloves, a face mask. These weren't random purchases. This wasn't someone grabbing supplies for a costume party. This was someone constructing a disguise, someone who understood that showing up as herself could have consequences she wanted to avoid. Think about that for a moment. Think about the mental state required to buy a disguise while hundreds of miles from home, knowing you're about to confront someone who doesn't want to see you. There's a chilling clarity to it, a focus that contradicts any later claims of acting on impulse or emotion. By evening, as the Florida sun began to set and the air cooled to that thick, humid warmth that defines summer nights in South Florida, Sakiyna was ready. The apartment complex where Kayla lived was quiet, the kind of place where people mind their own business. Neighbors were inside having dinner, watching TV, going through their normal evening routines. None of them knew that in a few hours, police tape would seal off their hallway, and their quiet community would become a crime scene. Surveillance cameras picked up movement around 11 p.m. A figure in dark clothing, face obscured, moving purposefully toward Kayla's unit. The footage is grainy, the kind that's almost useless except for confirming that someone was there. You can't see a face, can't make out identifying features. Just a shape moving through shadows, getting closer to a door where someone was about to answer their last knock. When Kayla opened that door, she came face to face with someone she blocked, someone she tried to remove from her life. Someone who traveled over 1,000 miles to stand on her doorstep, wearing a disguise. What were the first words spoken? We'll never know. What expression crossed Kayla's face when she recognized who it was beneath the wig? What tone did Sakiyna use when she started speaking? These details died in that apartment. What we do know comes from what neighbors heard. Raised voices, two women arguing, the sound of something crashing, and then a scream that cut to the night air with the kind of terror that makes people freeze in place, unsure if they really heard what they think they heard or if they should convince themselves it was something else. Inside that apartment, in a space that should have been Kayla's sanctuary, violence erupted. The scene investigators would find later told a story of chaos. Furniture overturned, glass shattered across the floor. Signs of a desperate struggle. Kayla fought back. The evidence showed that clearly. Defensive wounds on her arms, bruises that indicated she tried to protect herself, tried to push someone away. But she was caught off guard, attacked in her own home by someone who'd come prepared for confrontation. In her testimony later, Sakiyna would claim she blacked out during the fight. She'd say Kayla attacked her first with a piece of glass from a broken hookah, that she was defending herself and her unborn child, that she didn't remember the actual moment of violence. But physical evidence tells a different story than memory or convenient gaps in memory. The medical examiners report detailed multiple stab wounds, the kind that require repeated action, sustained force. You don't black out and accidentally inflict that kind of damage. You make choices, even if they're happening faster than conscious thought. And somewhere in those frantic moments, between the struggle and the screaming and the breaking of things, Kayla's life ended. 23 years old, lying on her own floor, surrounded by the wreckage of her interrupted evening. The silence that followed must have been deafening. That moment when the adrenaline starts to fade and reality begins seeping in. When you look down and see what your hands have done. What goes through someone's mind in that moment? Is it regret? Panic? Disbelief? Sakiyna didn't stay to find out. According to prosecutors, she moved quickly, methodically. She wiped down surfaces, gathered her things, tried to remove evidence of her presence. These actions, more than anything else, would undermine her later claims of being in shock or acting in self-defense. Because people who are truly traumatized and in shock don't typically have the presence of mind to clean a crime scene. They call 911. They freeze. They break down. They don't calmly try to erase their fingerprints before leaving. Surveillance cameras captured her car leaving the complex within minutes of the attack. No rushing, no erratic driving. Just a vehicle pulling away from a place where a young woman lay die while her phone buzzed with messages she'd never answer. The drive back to her hotel must have felt surreal. Every stoplight an eternity. Every other car potentially full of people who might somehow know, might somehow see the truth written on her face. She later described feeling numb, disconnected, like she was watching herself from outside her body. By morning, she was back at the airport, boarding her return flight to New York. If the flight attendants noticed anything off about her, they didn't report it. She was just another passenger, blending into the crowd, carrying secrets that weighed more than any luggage. Back in Tamarack Village, neighbors were finally emerging from their apartments. Someone had called 911 after the screaming stopped, after the silence became too wrong to ignore. Police arrived to find a front door slightly ajar, the kind of detail that immediately tells responding officers something bad is waiting inside. They found Kayla where she'd fallen, her phone nearby still lit up with notifications from people who didn't know yet that she'd never respond. Paramedics tried, going through the motions they're trained for, but it was too late. She was pronounced dead at the scene, and with that pronouncement, an entire future dissolved. The business she wanted to start, the places she wanted to travel, the family she might have had, the old woman she'd never become, all of it erased in one night of violence. Detectives arrived and began the methodical work of processing a scene that would stay with them. They photographed everything. The broken glass, the overturned furniture, the blood patterns that told a story without words. They collected evidence. Fibers from a torn wig, prints that hadn't been fully wiped away, digital data from Kayla's phone that showed her last moments online. And they started building a timeline, not knowing yet that it would lead them to an airport hundreds of miles away. By sunrise, Kayla's family had been notified. Imagine that phone call, that knock on the door, that moment when someone in uniform tells you that your daughter, your sister, your loved one is gone. Not from an accident or an illness, but from violence. That someone took her from you deliberately. The grief that follows that kind of news doesn't follow any normal pattern. It's mixed with rage, with disbelief, with questions that will never have satisfying answers. Why her? Why this way? Why couldn't she have just been left alone to live her life? The investigation moved quickly because Sakiyna had left a digital trail impossible to erase. Detectives subpoenaed flight records and found her name on a round-trip ticket purchase just days before, with a return flight the morning after the murder. They pulled hotel records, rental car information, GPS data. They traced her movement from the airport to a local store where she'd purchased her disguise, to the hotel where she'd changed, to the apartment complex where Kayla died. Every timestamp lined up perfectly. The wig found at the scene matched hair strands that would later be connected to Sakiyna. Surveillance footage, though grainy, showed a figure matching her build and height. The case built itself through the modern trail we all leave now. Credit card receipts, location data, digital breadcrumbs that make it nearly impossible to vanish. Within days, detectives had enough for an arrest warrant. They contacted the NYPD, and officers in Queens began surveillance on Sakiyna's address. When they moved in to make the arrest, neighbors said she seemed almost relieved, like she'd been waiting for this moment. She didn't run. She didn't resist. She just asked one question that told investigators everything they needed to know about consciousness of guilt. Did she die? Not what is this about? Not there must be some mistake. Just a question that confirmed she knew exactly why they were there and what she'd done. She was extradited to Florida, booked into Broward County Jail, and charged with first-degree murder with a deadly weapon. The mandatory sentence, if convicted, life in prison without possibility of parole. For the next 3 years, as the case wound through the legal system, two families existed in a kind of suspended agony. Kayla's family attended every hearing, held vigils, posted photos online with captions about justice and remembrance. They created a foundation in her name, spoke at community events about domestic violence and obsession. They turned their grief into action because the alternative was drowning in it. Sakiyna's family faced a different kind of hell, loving someone who'd done something unforgivable. They visited her in jail, wrote letters, tried to understand how the person they knew had become capable of this. They weren't monsters themselves, just people caught in the blast radius of someone else's choices. When the trial finally began in October 2025, the courtroom became a theater for two competing narratives. The prosecution's case was methodical and damning. They presented the timeline of travel, the purchase of disguised items, the surveillance footage, the forensic evidence. They walked the jury through each decision Sakiyna had made, each choice that indicated planning rather than passion. They brought in a medical examiner who testified about the nature of Kayla's wounds, about what those injuries indicated about the attack. They showed photos that made jurors look away, that made Kayla's mother leave the courtroom sobbing. They painted a picture of someone who becomes so consumed by jealousy that she planned and executed a murder, then tried to cover her tracks before fleeing back home. The prosecution's message was clear. This wasn't a fight gone wrong. This was an ambush. The defense had a harder job, but they tried. They presented Sakiyna as someone who'd been driven to desperation, who'd only wanted to talk, who'd been attacked first. They emphasized that she was pregnant at the time, that she feared for her unborn child's life when Kayla allegedly came at her with broken glass. They brought in a psychologist who testified about how trauma can cause memory gaps, how someone in genuine fear can react with disproportionate force. And then they put Sakiyna on the stand, a risky move that defense attorneys only make when they think their client's story is compelling enough to outweigh the risk. Watching her testify was uncomfortable in ways that are hard to articulate. She cried, describing the moment she says Kayla attacked her. She trembled when talking about the blood, about the panic, about not remembering the actual stabbing. To some observers, her emotions seemed genuine, the trauma of someone reliving the worst moment of their life. To others, it felt performed, calculated, the tears timed a little too perfectly with pauses and questioning. But then came cross-examination, And that's where the defense's narrative began to crumble. The prosecutor was methodical, walking Sakiyna through each decision that contradicted her claims of acting in self-defense or experiencing a blackout. Why did you buy a wig before going to Kayla's apartment? I wanted to protect my identity. From what? If you were just going to talk? I don't know. I wasn't thinking clearly. But you were thinking clearly enough to purchase specific items, rent a car, find her address, all while pregnant, and supposedly not planning any confrontation? The questions kept coming, each one exposing another crack in the story. Why did you wipe down surfaces if you were in shock? Why did you leave without calling for help if you believed you were defending yourself? Why did you fly home instead of going to the police if you truly believed you'd acted in self-defense? With each question, Sakiyna's answers became less convincing. Her voice would rise, then fall. She claimed not to remember, then provide specific details that contradicted the memory loss. She'd insist she'd been terrified, then describe actions that required calm deliberation. The jury watched all of it, their faces carefully neutral, taking notes, occasionally glancing at Kayla's family as if trying to measure the weight of their loss against the testimony they were hearing. The trial lasted weeks, but the deliberation was relatively quick. Less than a full day before the jury returned with their verdict. That's usually a bad sign for the defense. It means the evidence was clear enough that there wasn't much debate needed. When the verdict was read, when that word guilty echoed through the courtroom, the dam broke. Kayla's family had been holding themselves together through weeks of testimony, through hearing details about her final moments, through seeing photos they'd never be able to unsee. Now they could finally release it. The crying wasn't pretty or quiet. It was the kind of grief that sounds almost angry, that comes from somewhere deeper than tears. They held each other and sobbed and kept repeating, "We did it, baby, we did it," as if Kayla could hear them. Across the aisle, Sakiyna's family wept too, but their tears carried a different weight. They were losing their daughter to a system that wouldn't return her, mourning a person who was technically still alive but would never be free again. And Sakiyna herself just sat there, frozen, her face a mask that kept cracking and reforming. You could see her trying to process what life in prison means when you're 34 years old. Every birthday, every holiday, every moment of life happening outside while you remain static inside concrete walls. The judge, before pronouncing sentence, took a moment to address the courtroom. These cases, he said, remind us how quickly our lives can be altered by choices we make in moments of emotional intensity. He spoke about jealousy, about obsession, about the false intimacy of social media that makes us feel connected to lives we have no actual part in. And then he sentenced Sakiyna Thompson to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a sentence that means she'll die behind bars unless something extraordinary happens with appeals. As they led her out of the courtroom in shackles, she glanced back once at her family. It was a look that contained everything: apology, grief, disbelief, acceptance. And then she was gone, disappeared into the machinery of the prison system, where she'll become a number, a case file, a cautionary tale. The courtroom emptied slowly. Kayla's family stayed to speak with prosecutors, to thank them, to hold each other a little longer before returning to a world where their daughter was still gone despite the verdict. Media crowded outside, asking for statements, looking for sound bites that would compress this tragedy into digestible segments. But here's what stays with me about this case, and why I think it matters beyond the true crime narrative. This didn't have to happen. At so many points along the way, there were exits, opportunities to choose differently. Sakiyna could have accepted the relationship was over. She could have blocked Kayla back and moved on. She could have talked to a therapist about the obsession instead of feeding it. She could have not booked that flight, not bought that disguise, not knocked on that door. And if she had knocked, if confrontation felt unavoidable, she could have walked away when things got heated. She could have called for help instead of violence. She could have done literally anything other than what she did. But she didn't, and that's the terrible truth about these cases. They're built from a series of choices, each one feeling justified in the moment, each one leading further down a path that becomes harder to turn back from. The jealousy felt reasonable. The need to confront felt necessary. The anger in the moment felt righteous. And then suddenly you're standing in an apartment with blood on your hands and a person dead at your feet. And every choice that brought you there feels inevitable when really they were all optional. We live in an age where jealousy has more fuel than ever before. We curate our lives online, presenting highlight reels that others compare to their behind-the-scenes footage. We can monitor exes with casual scroll, torture ourselves with updates about people who moved on while we're still stuck. The block button is supposed to be a boundary, but to someone spiraling, it becomes an obsession amplifier. What are they saying now? What am I missing? The not knowing becomes unbearable. But here's what this case should teach us. That discomfort, that jealousy, that burning need to know and confront is a signal. It's your mind telling you that you're focused on the wrong things, that you try to control what can't be controlled, that you need to redirect the energy into healing rather than monitoring. Every person who's been through a difficult breakup knows that toxic pull to check on an ex, to see who replaced you, to compare yourself to someone new. It's a near universal experience. But most people feel that pull and resist it. They block the accounts. They talk to friends. They throw themselves into work or hobbies or new relationships. They choose the harder path of moving on because they understand that the alternative leads nowhere good. Sakiyna made different choices. She gave into every impulse, followed every thread of obsession, took the jealousy that most people feel and transformed it into something deadly. And now 2 families are destroyed. Kayla's family has a grave to visit instead of a daughter to call. They have memories frozen in time, a life that stopped at 23, a future full of milestones she'll never reach. And Sakiyna's family has a daughter locked away forever, a relationship mediated through prison phones and supervised visits, decades of life happening outside while she remains trapped in the consequences of one night's choices. There's no winners here, no satisfaction, just permanent, irreversible loss that ripples outward through families and communities. And everyone who hears this story and thinks about their own capacity for jealousy, their own struggles with letting go. So let me ask you something. When is checking up on an ex cross the line into stalking? When does jealousy become obsession? When does hurt transform into something dangerous? These aren't hypothetical questions. They're real boundaries that everyone navigating relationships and breakups has to consider. Most of us will never cross those lines into violence, but many of us have stood closer to them than we'd like to admit. We've sent that message we shouldn't have sent, made that drive past someone's house, scrolled too deep into someone's social media, created fake accounts to see what we've been blocked from seeing. These aren't rare behaviors. They're common enough that we've normalized them, turned them into jokes, made memes about FBI-level stalking our exes. But normalization is dangerous because it obscures the warning signs, makes it harder to recognize when surveillance becomes obsession, when interest becomes fixation, when we're no longer moving on but actively holding on to something toxic. If this case made you uncomfortable, if it made you think about your own behaviors or someone you know, that discomfort is valuable. Sit with it. Ask yourself the hard questions about boundaries and respect, and the difference between wanting closure and refusing to accept that some chapters are closed. As Kayla's family rebuilds their lives around a permanent absence of someone they loved, and as Sakiyna begins what will likely be 50 or more years behind bars, the rest of us are left with questions about the world we've built. A world where relationships play out publicly, where rejection can be broadcast, where the line between digital and physical space has blurred until we forget that real consequences follow virtual actions. Social media didn't kill Kayla Hodgson. Jealousy and violence did. But the tools we use to connect also give us unprecedented access to fuel the worst parts of human nature. They let us obsess, compare, monitor, and stew in feelings that previous generations had less ability to indulge. There's something to be said for the healthy distance that existed when moving on meant actually not knowing what an ex was doing, when boundaries were enforced by physical space rather than just digital blocks that can feel more provocative than protective. I don't have answers to these larger questions. I don't know how we balance connection with boundaries, transparency with privacy, freedom to post our lives with awareness that everything we share might affect someone we've forgotten about. But I know this. We have to find ways to teach people, especially young people navigating relationships, that jealousy is normal but acting on it destructively is a choice. That being blocked isn't a challenge to overcome but a boundary to respect. that no romantic relationship is worth losing yourself over, and certainly not worth harming another person for. This case will fade from headlines eventually. Sakiyna will become just another inmate number. Kayla will become a name on a memorial page. But the lessons here matter beyond the specific tragedy. They matter every time someone feels that surge of jealousy and has to decide what to do with it. They matter every time a blocked account feels like a personal attack rather than someone else's reasonable boundary. They matter every time we have to choose between obsessing over something we've lost or investing in something new. What's your honest reaction to this case? Do you see warning signs you've ignored in your own life or in people you know? What responsibility do we have to recognize when someone's jealousy is escalating into something dangerous? These aren't comfortable questions, but they're necessary ones. Share your thoughts below. This is exactly the kind of case that stays with you, that makes you reflect on human nature and the choices we all face when emotions run hot. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that true crime isn't entertainment, but real lives permanently altered, then hit that like button and subscribe for more cases that deserve attention, that force us to grapple with uncomfortable truths about jealousy, obsession, and the distance between feeling something and acting on it. Because somewhere tonight, someone is scrolling through an ex's photos, feeling that familiar burn of jealousy, deciding what to do with that feeling, and the choice they make matters more than they might realize.